into his desire. But God will cancel anything vain that Satan throws in, and God will confirm and establish his signs. And some of these words like vanity, vain, and establish are not actually in the Arabic, but in the Yusuf Ali's translation, he adds these words to either help the meaning or maybe shape the meaning too. But I have no problem with his interpolations here. But what this says is that every single prophet, it says, Satan threw some vanity in there, some bad stuff in there, but God made sure that got canceled out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's kind of a justification for things that could happen, such as the satanic verses.
And of course, that could lead to other Islamic doctrines like abrogation,
right?
Which we can talk about a little.
Yeah, and abrogation is actually for a couple of different reasons in Islam, but certainly when messing up is one reason.
All right, a useful tool,
right? Now, Surah 17, 73 to 75 says, "And their purpose was to tempt thee away from that which we had revealed unto thee, to substitute in our name something quite different. In that case, behold, they would certainly have made thee their friend. And had we not given thee strength, thou wouldst nearly have inclined to them a little. In that case, we should have made thee taste double portion, that is, of punishment, in this life, and an equal portion in death. And moreover, thou wouldst have found none to help thee against us." Okay, so this seems like it talks directly about a situation like the satanic verses. Okay, now some Muslims say, well, Surah 17, 73 to 75 was revealed at the time of the Prophet's alleged journey to heaven. Tabari and Ibn Sa'd, and Ibn Sa'd, I'll remind you, was 845 AD, very, very early. They both said that Surah 17, 73 to 75 was revealed about the same time as the satanic verses.
Mm-hmm. So that could be something relating directly to the satanic verses, according to these Muslim writers.
Mm-hmm. And Muslims even have a concept for this. There's a term roughly pronounced wiswas. Wiswas sounds like whispering, and the term means for the whisperings of Satan. Okay, so with that, that's kind of the case, I guess, of saying this is why the satanic verses were originally in there. Okay, now we haven't heard anything or presented anything about the other side of the picture. What do Muslims say about that? There are basically 9 Muslims objections that I know about, and I read not only AnsweringIslam.org, but I read the Muslim side that did that response. And to quickly mention them, the first objection, well, in arbitrary order, was that only these biographers and only the later people mention this. There are others that did not mention the satanic verses. In particular, he said, others who didn't were Sahih Muslim, which is sort of the second highest hadith, Abu Dawud, which wrote another hadith, Ahmad bin Hanbal, who started the Hanbalites, and Ibn Hisham. Okay, well, for a response to this objection, there are lots of things in one collection of hadiths are not in other hadiths. For example, even though the Bukhari hadiths are longer than the Sahih Muslim, they don't have material on why to pay zakat. They don't have the punishment of hoarding, and they don't talk about the angel on the right and left of a person as found in Sahih Muslim Volume 2. Okay. For a second example, we know that Ibn Hisham used Bukhari, and he used the other Waqidi, but he also left out the part about the satanic, I think it was Ibn Ishaq, but he used that, but he left out the part about the satanic verses. So we know he used the material and deliberately left something out. So if he was maybe too embarrassed to put it in, that's not proof that it didn't happen.
Okay, and also that's this objection is also a violation of logic, because it's basically an argument from silence.
Yeah, it's an argument from silence.
And we all know arguments from silence don't prove a thing.
Right. I mean, they might add weight to an argument, to be fair, but they don't actually prove just because people are silent. But we have lots of people. We have actually 11 people who weren't silent and wrote about it, 4 early and 7 later.
And to make that point to the audience there about making an argument from silence, it's sort of like you're in a murder case in a court trial, and the defendant comes up in his own defense, and there's a whole there's 40 witnesses that saw him do it, okay, and they've all testified against him, and he comes up in his own defense and he says, okay, you got 40 witnesses that saw me do it, but I'm going to bring into this courtroom 100 people that didn't see me do it. That gives me more than twice the witnesses you've got.
Right.
But the problem is, these 100 witnesses that didn't see him do it, it doesn't prove a thing.
Yeah, it doesn't mean alibi to say they saw them doing something else at the same
Exactly.
time, but they were off.
Right, and that's exactly what they're saying here when they're saying, well, these guys didn't write about it. So,
yeah, and speaking of, if you're going to go with arguments of silence, a second argument from silence that the non-Muslims can make is says, well, if these four biographers wrote about it, there's nobody else who wrote that was wrong. So arguments from silence, they may not have much weight, but they can work both ways.
Exactly.
All right. Second objection is they say, well, the satanic verses don't fit in with the rest of Surah 53. Okay. Well, there are a couple responses for that. First of all, it's kind of odd that some Muslims say that parts of Surah 53 were revealed later than other parts. Some Muslims say. So it's like if they're related to other parts, then maybe they weren't supposed to fit in anyway. Okay. The other thing that when they make this, they have to remember that the modern part was not always in there. They took out one part and put it in another part. So if the early part doesn't fit in with the modern part, well, the parts were never together at the same time anyway.
And it's also interesting, having listened to Muslim apologists talk about how the Quran was put together. They say it was revealed over a 23-year period, some of it in Mecca, some of it in Medina, in a piecemeal fashion.
Some they're not sure.
Right. And basically, you can have Muhammad in one surah giving parts of that surah while he was in Medina, and years later he gave other parts of that same surah in Mecca.
Yeah,
and so it's all kind of stuck together.
And that sort of makes sense, because if they put the Quran together after Muhammad died, and then Uthman standardized the Quran, who knows what they just stuck where.
Right, and so I'm saying that even from Muslim sources, they're telling us that that's how the Quran was put together, and it's so you have different time zones or periods that Muhammad said things, and they're stuck together, and they're like
and even on Surah 53, if you say that the original part or the modern part don't fit with the rest, well, verses 51 and 53 on Surah 53, they're addressed personally to Muhammad. And so if it was a revelation for other people, then all of a sudden the subject of the surah changed there. So you could say that didn't really fit in either. So the fact that something doesn't appear to fit in doesn't necessarily mean that it was or wasn't a part of it.
Right.
Okay. Well, a third objection is, says these passages that talk about whisperings of Satan and temptations and interjections, they might have been written much earlier than Surah 53, not at the same time. Now, the response to that is that Tabari and Ibn Sa'd both say that the satanic verses were revealed at the same time as Surah 17, 73 to 75. And I should say they didn't use the term satanic verses. I think that was a later term. But the verses that we're talking about, we'll just call it